We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
President Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine, and yet responses from globalist leaders appear to be following an old playbook that has proven in the past to be less than successful. Now, Putin knows this playbook because it's the same response that has been used time and time again: sanctions and recriminations. But has the Russian president prepared for this in advance? And does he have a strategy in place that can help him wait it all out while the West fiddles along? Now, the world is watching on as President Putin does what many experts thought undoable or unthinkable. He is engaged in a modern large-scale land war in Europe. For weeks, we've heard from the Biden administration that Putin was going to invade. The nation's intelligence agencies were uniform in presenting the idea that this event could actually happen. So congratulations to them. Team Biden was right. But that begs the bigger question, perhaps the biggest question of them all. They knew it was coming. The might of US government analysis said it was going to happen, and not a single solitary thing was done to actually try and stop it before it began. Well, other than sending Vice President Kamala Harris to Europe to lecture foreign leaders and allies about what war actually is, and some would argue that she herself has no idea. And that was what the Biden administration was doing. Now, to many of us on the outside, that seems that the White House was sitting on its collective hands. Welcome to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Now, on today's episode, we're joined by defense expert Dave Patterson to unravel the Biden administration's response and what might happen next with Vladimir Putin, and also where might the Russian leader turn his greedy eyes next. We'll be talking financial impacts with economics guru Andrew Moran and discover why the mainstream media is determined to spin the already abysmal economy into something that came about only due to the war in Ukraine. We have a special Say What segment coming up with longtime host of this here Liberty Nation Radio, Tim Donner. And last, but by no means least, we'll be talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza, examining the hottest cases of the week and how they impact your liberty. I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out in Dalton, Georgia on WBAC 1230 AM. Thank you for being here. You're appreciated. And remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's dive right in. Vladimir Putin's troops are in Ukraine, and President Joe Biden is using sanctions to try and hold back the Russian bear. But will they do any good? And more importantly, what happens next? Well, to help us answer these questions, we're joined once again by former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Controller, Dave Patterson. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Hey, thank you, Mark. Glad to be
Dave,
with you.
What's your professional assessment of the situation as it stands?
Well, the worst has happened. Putin has viewed the Biden administration and NATO and the EU as not a particularly strong impediment against him doing what he said he was going to do back in July. And more recently in a speech, he said he was going to recover the Ukraine because it rightfully belonged to Russia. And so he started that process.
I mean, there's been a lot of talk about where does he go from here and what happens next. And I think more precisely, where will Putin go next? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that he would like to recover all of the former Soviet Union. I believe that he's going to have a very difficult time, but nonetheless, he will find some pretext to do whatever he wants to do, just like he did in Ukraine. The Baltics are particularly good targets. Whether he would do that and risk a Article 5 response from NATO, well, that remains to be seen. But there are other places that he might eye as being appealing. Kazakhstan, for example, where he just recently intervened in the Kazakhstani problems.
Yeah, the Article 5 there that you mentioned from the NATO treaty, that's the Musketeers article, I believe it's known as a all for one and one for all. So if one NATO member is attacked, then all NATO members respond. Now, of course, Ukraine isn't a NATO member, so he can really operate with fairly impunity from NATO, can't he, at the moment?
From his perspective, yes, absolutely. I mean, he has created the pretext of rescuing ethnic Russians from the clutches of the Zelensky regime. And he has created this mythology around that. He has made this mythology a truth to the Russian people, and that's what he's based his invasion on.
Okay, so at the moment, it seems that world leaders are looking at sanctions. They're applying sanctions already. They're talking about cutting off various ties. Now, can Vladimir Putin and his army and his government, can they withstand the various sanctions and things? Or is this something that they've likely prepared for?
I believe that his entrees to China is part of the preparation for withstanding the economic sanctions that have come, as we have said in Liberty Nation, too late and too few. But nonetheless, he's counting, I believe, on China to bolster his financial position, so that the sanctions are not as great an impact as they might otherwise have been.
Yeah, I believe there's a recent deal being made whilst Vladimir Putin was visiting the Winter Olympics in Beijing, and it was an energy deal worth 30 years worth of supply or something. So I think from that point of view, there'll certainly be a lot of dollars or yuan flowing into Moscow. But you mentioned Kazakhstan earlier. Now, I only knew this was significant because of what you told me personally. But could you explain that to our listeners, please?
Well, there were numerous riots that took place ostensibly because of the lifting of the cap on gas in Kazakhstan, and particularly liquid natural gas, which is what most Kazakhs use in their cars. And consequently, there were a lot of riots. And the Russian military came in under the pretext of peacekeeping and establishing order, and they landed about 2,500 troops, as I recall, in order to do that.
And what was the response of the West to this?
Well, we were monitoring the situation, and that we had strong words condemning any further incursion by Russia into Kazakhstan.
So no real response then would be
no real response. No, and quite frankly, I would, in one of my articles, I mentioned this is probably a good thing, because it is what was Biden going to do actually, and so sitting in the grandstands watching it play out was probably the better part of valor for him.
Well, let's talk about Joe Biden for a moment. I think it's fairly clear to many people, if not those in the Fourth Estate, the American Fourth Estate, that this probably wouldn't have happened if Joe Biden were not president and Donald Trump were. What's your take on that?
I think there's a very strong case that this would not have happened if Donald Trump were president of the United States right now. And the fact is that what Donald Trump brought to geopolitics was doubt. Nobody could predict what he would do or what he would think or what he would say. And you know, when it comes to weapons, doubt is a fairly effective weapon.
It seems that he was just a little bit crazy enough to go all out on things. And that's really what you want opposition nations to be thinking, that we don't know how far this person would go. Now, so far, we haven't had huge amount of response from the administration, other than, of course, they're going to be looking for a united response. They're looking at different sanctions, cutting off different political avenues. How far could they go if they really wanted?
Well, I think the United States and the Western allies could, first and foremost, stop all commercial traffic into and out of Russia. they could start the process of stopping all markets and all trade with Russia. And after a while, it'll be kind of tough for China to pick up the 1.6 trillion GDP of Russia.
Dave Patterson, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Later in the show, we're talking liberty with Scott D. Cosenza, discussing the hot cases that impact you and your liberties. But up next, we ask how Biden's warning of expensive times ahead for the American people is being manipulated by the media, and whether the public is buying what the Fourth Estate has on offer. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
We're doing it for real, really real. Liberty Nation.
And Jeff Charles, contributor for LibertyNation.com.
I think we're starting to make an impact. Liberty style, fight for freedom.
The tracking poll sponsored by Liberty Nation for Thursday.
Mentioned by Dan Bongino, Rasmussen, Jordan Peterson, and
I can
others.
do it again if you want me to.
Cited in Mark Levin's American Marxism.
I think we're starting to make a really big impact. Get noticed. We're doing it.